time for us to hear from Elle Jones, who, as Bonnie mentioned, is an author and poet, journalist, educator, and advocate. Dr. Elle Jones is all of these things and more. A respected poet, she was two-time National Slam champion in 2007 and 2008, poet laureate of Halifax in 2013 through 2015, resident of the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa in 2015, and poet in residence at the University of Toronto Scarborough in 2021. What defines her achievements is a commitment to activism and community advocacy to highlight inequities and redress injustices. The recognition of her performances, one of which many of you heard when I played video of her just a couple of weeks ago, and also I played it a few months ago. The recognition of her performances, teaching, and political commitment testifies to the exceptional influence she has exercised during the Black Lives Matter movement and the expansion of Black scholarship in Canadian academia. So it is my privilege to share Elle with you, whom I met in our Sabile service, our Thursdays that I attend. We both attend quite weekly with an international attendance. So take it away, Elle.
Thank you so much. Which poem was it that you played?
It has to do with Palestine.
Oh, that doesn't help. Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you all. Good morning for you guys, afternoon for me. It's so wonderful to be here with you. I'm so honored to be invited into this beautiful space, and I've already been enjoying so much the spirit that you've all shared and just the generosity and the joy that's been in this space. So thank you. Before I start on the sermon, just in case people don't know, so I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We were talking about this a little bit in small groups. We're on the east coast of Canada. It's also the first point of contact in North America for African people. So in 1603, Matthew da Costa was the first African person to set foot in North America. He was translating on a Portuguese trade mission. He was from Cape Verde. One more story I'll tell you because it's relevant to the story of the day is one of our most sort of famous African Nova Scotians is a man named Richard Preston. He was born into slavery in Virginia. His mother escaped during the War of 1812 as a refugee and came to Nova Scotia, and that's all he knew. Richard Preston had a scar on his face because he had intervened when the master was beating a slave and had caught him in the face. So he had a distinctive scar, rather like Odyssey, if you guys have seen the Odyssey, or like Odysseus. He grew up to be an amazing, charismatic preacher. And when he was in his early 20s, he escaped and came to Canada to search for his mother. He came to Nova Scotia. And the story goes that he asked, like, where's the Black community? He was looking for a place, and they sent him to North Preston, or the Prestons. And a woman opened the door of the guest house, and she recognized the scar on his face, and it was his mother. So they were reunited. And he believed that that could have only happened due to a holy miracle, that God must be working in him to reunite them. He's contemporaneous with Frederick Douglass, for example. He goes to London and actually becomes probably the most qualified preacher in the province, and then set up the Black church. So he realized that there was many different waves of Black people in Nova Scotia. I won't get into it, but like we needed something to unify us. So he walked across the province and founded the African United Baptist Association, founding 17 mother churches across the province. So that's a little bit about some of our history. So if you ever come up here, go to the Prestons. It's beautiful. All right. So we are actually talking about that today. Where is the church? What is the church? So the readings I took are from our lectionary. I'll read you them. So the first one is from Romans 12, the whole verses 1 to 8. I'm just going to read this section. For as in one body, we have many members, and not all the members have the same function. So we who are many are one body in Christ, and individually we are members one of another. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry in ministering, the teacher in teaching, the exhorter in exhortation, the giver in generosity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness. And then the second reading from the gospel, the whole gospel is Matthew 16, 13 to 20. I've chosen out, and I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. So these were our readings for the week. Am I going to be able to move slides? Come on. There. Okay. So I'm going to read. Normally I just talk off my head, but I actually wrote for you guys, so you're special. So I'm going to have to read and do slides at the same time. So the readings for this week prompt us to think about who is the church. This is not just a theological question for us. It is actually an urgent one. Last month, the Synod of the Church of England overwhelmingly passed a motion to receive the Kairos II document. And that document, which it's not going to let me show you. Sorry, here we go. So this document represents the call and cry of Palestinian Christians, in which Palestinians are living in a time of genocide, ethnic cleansing, settler colonialism, and forced displacement. It details the catastrophic assault that the Israel government has inflicted on Gaza, even while in the West Bank. Israel supports the confiscation of land, the expansion of settlements and outposts, the unchecked violence inflicted by settlers, the multiplication of checkpoints and other restrictions, and Palestinian existence has become a living hell. This document challenges the global church, asking how can one speak of Christian fellowship or communion while denying, supporting, justifying, or remaining silent before genocide? So I want to go back to that question. Who is the church? The motion passed by the Anglican Church in the UK did not even demand that members accept this document. It simply called for engagement and prayer. Yet even that modest demand did not stop the UK chief rabbi from accusing the church of anti-Semitism, calling it a, quote, sad day for Jewish-Christian relations, unquote. Shamefully, while the majority of laity, clergy, and bishops voted to accept the motion, there were church leaders who, rather than join Palestinian Christians in witness, sided with the rabbi and the Jewish Board of Deputies in naming the document and liberation theology more broadly as being violent, divisive, and theologically unsound. One might note the audacity of accusing a document calling for peace and justice in the terms of liberation theology as extreme rhetoric in the face of countless Israeli leaders justifying the genocide of Palestinians by citing verses on Amalek or claiming rights over the land due to biblical readings of Judea and Samaria. Not to mention the IDF smashing statues of Jesus, bombing churches, sniping nuns, and beating Palestinian Christians at Easter celebrations. It is, I confess, difficult for me to have any understanding or empathy for any Christian who can stand in a pulpit on Sunday and call themselves the leader of the flock, and then not only stay silent while settler terrorists burn and bulldoze the last Christian village in the West Bank, Taibe, but actively work to suppress Christian voices, pleading for us to listen. Who is the church for, if in a time of genocide and ethnic cleansing, we have leaders who prefer, out of cowardice or avarice, to side against their fellow Christians? How can we even have an interfaith relationship, let alone prioritize it, if that relationship requires us to stay silent about injustice? Among the many things Jesus models for us is the way he held those he loved most closely the most accountable. Jesus was not afraid to correct and challenge and push and demand and kick money lenders out of the temple and send the powerful away empty. An interfaith relationship based on true love would not only value Muslim lives, it would demand better of the chief rabbi and ally with the many anti-Zionist Jews who have understood what true solidarity looks like. In the last couple of weeks, an American delegation of multi-faith pilgrims led by Christians and hosted by Sabeel, a liberation theology center in Jerusalem, was forbidden entry by Jerusalem, blocking access to holy sites for people of all faiths. So when we ask, who is the church? We must confront that even in the face of a democratic majority of the Anglican Church, we have church leaders who sided against their own congregations, against Palestinian Christians, and against the body of the church, which we believe is moved by the Holy Spirit when we prayerfully make these decisions. For these leaders, the political convenience of alliance with Israel outweighs any Christian call or duty. I have often pointed out the irony of Christians who will claim to be victims of oppression if someone says happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas, but then in the face of threatened destruction of the Christian presence in the Holy Land, side time and time again with the oppressor. As Munter Isaac asks us, What does it mean to be the church in a time of genocide? And what does it mean when the Western church in Western countries that hold themselves up as the arbiters of human rights, democracy, and international law has not only been completely unable to respond to the genocide of Palestinians, but is being complicit in the racist colonial dehumanization as well? I think that in asking who is the church, perhaps an equal question is, where is the church? This is a question that has multiple meanings. We can hear it in the same register of the cry that asks, where is God during a genocide? And since we are the church, when the church does not respond, when it fails and betrays Palestinian Christians, then it is us, not God, who are responsible. For if we understand Jesus as telling us that we are the rock, that is upon us whom the church is built, then it is we who have the responsibility of bringing God's kingdom into being here on earth. But when we ask, where is the church? We are also asking something else. I think here of the words of Omar Harami, the director of Sabeel, who in the face of Israel blocking access to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on Easter wrote, "Yes, our church building may be closed this year, but this matters little. It was already empty, for the tomb is empty. We worry more for the tombs being opened by war and our collective silence. Buildings do not pray. People do. When people are afraid, we must remind them. Freedom is coming. The good news is coming, but only if we are willing to receive it and share it. As Palestinians tell us, all land is holy. When a delegation is turned back at the border, though they cannot physically visit sites of pilgrimage or walk where Jesus walked, their solidarity is in fact strengthened. Christ, as Palestinians tell us, is at the checkpoint. Because we are the church, our faith cannot be stopped by soldiers or border guards or visas or cops or terrorists burning and killing their way across the West Bank. And that is as true in our own communities as it is in Jerusalem. Jesus does not ask us as a church to sit silently in pews. He tells us that what we want to see in heaven, we must work to bring about here on earth. The church must be where we plant it, and in our actions. When we follow Jesus, we take him as a model of how to live as a community, one that values humanity over power, peace over war, and care over domination. In the words of the African-American poet Langston Hughes, let down your bucket where you are. Although I was raised in the church, like many people in my teens and adulthood, I moved away from faith. It was actually my witness trip to the West Bank with Sabeel that brought me back to faith. And in renewing that faith, I discovered how much of the values of liberation theology were already present in my work. I want to read to you a small section from my book, Abolitionist Intimacies, a tracing of my work fighting for the abolition of prisons and against state violence. And I just want to read you this section. Desmond says to me, we may not be religious, but what we do is like a religious act. We imagine and work toward a better world, but the heaven we are trying to make is here on earth. And while we are living here and struggling, we are in hell. But heaven and hell are the same place for us. So every day we wake up in hell and we have to do our best to enter heaven. We have to sacrifice for that. And we have to pay the price for that. We don't hold anything back in this work. Not savings, not the tongues that get us labeled troublemakers, not even our tears, although we push them back and get up the next morning and keep fighting on. Because someone has to buy the groceries, put the clothes in the prison boxes, pay the gas for visits. Someone has to hold the hands in court and call the lawyer and visit the jail and take the call from the suicide cell. It's not that I save them. It is that their trust and care sustains and nurtures me. That every day when I despair, when I don't know how I can pick up and rebuild again, when I don't know how I can fight these fights without sickening and dying from it, it is their voices that remind me over and over who I am and why we do this work. I'm not imagining my death. These are my expressions of my commitment to the living, to my life and the life of others, to the sacrifice that isn't a sacrifice, but a sacrament, a blessing. So I wrote those words before I was back in the church. And I'm struck now by how much they echo what Jesus was saying about the church, that we build it on this rock and we carry those keys into heaven. And I have to scroll back and find it. I tell the story in my book, and usually in life, of how I became an abolitionist at the age of 13 when I read Oscar Wilde's poem, The Ballad of Reading Gaol. Oscar Wilde was imprisoned under British sodomy laws that are still enforced in over 70 countries around the world, a legacy of British imperialism. My favorite lines from this poem read, "I know not whether laws be right, or whether laws be wrong. All that we know that lie in jail is that the wall is strong, and that each day is like a year whose days are long. This too I know, and wise it were if each could know the same, that every prison that men build is built with bricks of shame, and bound with bars, lest Christ should see how men their brothers maim. With bars they blur the goodly moon, and they blind the goodly sun, and they do well to hide their hell, for in it things are done that Son of God nor Son of Man ever should look upon." Reading these words now, I'm struck by how before I knew how God was working in me, he was giving me the words not only to join the struggle against prisons, but also to connect that struggle to the work of liberation theology. We cannot tolerate any place, whether in Gaza or in a private prison or in our own hearts and minds where cops and guards so often dwell, that God would be ashamed to look upon. Jesus asks us if we have tended the sick, fed the hungry, and visited the prisoner, a reminder that these are the foundations of the church that we must honor. In the West Bank, kilometers from the genocide in Gaza, amid the rubble of bulldozed homes and at checkpoints and in the homes of prisoners and peace activists alike, it was the faith of Palestinians that bowled me over. How can one walk through rubble and see the faith of Palestinians not only not waver, but strengthen, and to see how that faith is inextricably bound to land and not be moved, terribly and beautiful? It was not that we visited the tomb of Jesus, nor that we visited holy sites. It was that the example of Jesus lives so fully within Palestinians today that I cannot know where they end and he begins. I think of Sde Temin prison in Israel, a concentration torture camp where soldiers recently walked out not because they objected to the horrific rape and torture in the prison, but because commanders had taken down violent signs supporting hazing. I think of how, when a video of soldiers raping a Palestinian captive was leaked, Israelis rioted in support of the rapists, and they were feted on Israeli talk shows. I think about Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, former director of Gaza's Kamal Adwan Hospital, being tortured to death within those walls. I think about how when we were visiting Mustafa Barghouti, our meeting was interrupted by Dr. Safia's wife calling from Gaza, and how Dr. Barghouti still showed us the most gracious hospitality as the call dropped over and over while he still tried to host us. I think of the victims of torture we spoke with, who detailed for hours the most horrific abusive rapes and tortures, stories given to us in the hopes we would return home and bear witness. How Palestinians again and again have laid bare their worst traumas, too often to be met with betrayal, as in the case of Senator Raphael Warnock, who visited Palestine with a church delegation in 2014, prayed with Palestinian Christians, cried, said he recognized the conditions of apartheid, and then went home, took money from AIPAC to run for Senate, and said he stood with Israel. Abolition does not only call for the dismantling of prisons and punishment, from military weapons to prison cells to border policing to cop cities. It also calls on us to create the conditions to transform the world today. I will often say I am a practical abolitionist. I know that prisons will not end in my lifetime. And even if somehow aliens came down tomorrow and zapped every prison out of existence, as my friend Rachel says, we ain't ready. Because it is not only the physical building of a prison we are resisting, or the officer with a gun, or the masked ICE agent. It is the idea that brings about these things, that says, my neighbor is a threat to me, that doesn't want to see someone asking for change outside the coffee shop, so calls the police to clear them away. The ideology that meets violence with violence, that pours all our money into wars and tough on crime, and more police and more weapons and more cells, when a fraction of that money could provide housing and healthcare and food and safety for all. And it is the ideology that stretches across the US empire and its client states, from Germany and the UK, my own country of Canada, and inside Israel itself. And so we must work now, in our daily lives, to make us ready, to learn to deal with conflict and harm in different ways, to raise our children differently without teaching them that power lies in domination, to teach men differently about consent, to name and confront harm in our communities, to give families tools to deal with generational harm. In other words, in religious terms, we must on this earth forge the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Who is the church? Where is the church? It is in us. And every day we are tasked to live up to that. There is in each of us the capacity to transform this world and ourselves and each other. To do so requires us to confront fear and cowardice and silence. We must sometimes lose friends and jobs and reputations. We must do these things willingly, in the spirit of courageous discipleship, because in loosing our dependence on the things of this earth that tell us we can have what we want if we only accept the status quo and injustice, we open for ourselves another world, a world not only of faith and the spirit, but of justice. Where is the church? It is with us and in a free Palestine. Thank you. I'm going to go back and show you these slides and explain them a bit. These are all from the trip to the West Bank. I was flipping through them a bit, but I'll just make some of them make sense. So this is outside Issa Amro's house in Hebron. You can see the Free Palestine olive tree. His compound house is like surrounded by settlers and regularly attacked and burned and terrorized by them. I was like, don't the soldiers come in and see Free Palestine on the olive tree? He's like, yeah, so what? So just this incredible example of what they call sumud, steadfastness in the face of everything and the maintenance of your own values. This is their community center. This was at Malkar. Some of you have seen another No Other Land. So that documentary, this is outside that community, and this is the father of the leader of the community who was run over by a settler and murdered. And you'll see these memorials all over Palestine. So you can see the heart and the root coming from it. This is the Al-Aqsa, the mosque. You can see the broken windows where the IDF repels in and shoots down at worshippers. So Ben Gvir regularly like storms this with settlers. You can see it's empty, so you have to get a pass to pray inside the mosque. So there's a lot of solidarity praying that takes place between Muslims and Christians and like Jewish people as well that are non-Zionist that will pray outside. And so you get this. So for example, at Ramadan, they were forbidden to pray within the mosque. So people of all faiths in solidarity prayed outside. But you can see it's totally empty when we were there. This is, of course, the site where Muhammad gets the pillars of Islam and also ascends. This is the Chihuahua that was this fierce guardian of the Armenian quarter. So it's just funny because they had like two dogs, and one was this big guard dog, was the softest, sweetest dog that just wanted to lick you. And then the little Chihuahua just wanted to bark and defend the quarter. So a reminder that no matter what our size, we all have the capacity for incredible resistance. And that Chihuahua reminds me of that. We took a tour of Old Jerusalem, and our tour guide, who was an Afro-Palestinian man who had been named Mahmoud, who had been a political prisoner for 17 years. He paused here and said, this is what they mean by peace. Take a piece of Jerusalem, piece by piece. They want it. This is Silwan. So this is the Eyewitness Silwan project. So you can see the eyes of famous people painted across the building. So it's like Desmond Tutu, like George Floyd, Eric Garner, Shireen Abu Akleh. So they paint and the eyes look back at the occupier. There's also the eyes of the blind man given sight by Jesus. So it's a site of art and resistance. This is in Aida refugee camp. This is Shireen Abu Akleh, the American Palestinian journalist who was sniped and killed by Israelis. And then her coffin was at the funeral, and they carried her coffin. That was also stormed, and they tried to rip the coffin out of their hands. Our tour guide, Lorraine, was actually her niece. So we were able to see Palestine with Lorraine Abu Akleh. This is inside Ida as well. This is the wall, and you can see the solidarity in Bethlehem, so that you can see I can't breathe. So all over was solidarity between the Black tradition and Palestinians. I just have a couple more. Doesn't want to go now. Just more wall. This is also by the Banksy Hotel. And then here, finally, this is on the wall of Ida, and I take this as such a powerful image, hope written on the wall of the refugee camp. And so when we ask, like, where is God? Where is the church? It is there, within the walls, within the checkpoints, at all of these sites of oppression. That is when God moves the most, and that is what we are called for. So if we have time at the end, I'll do a poem, but I know there's time for discussion, so I open it up to that. Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in. I'm so
Well,
Canadian.
Robina and I are opening the conversation with you. I'm kind of speechless, actually. Robina?
I have several thoughts, but first and foremost, thank you so much, Elle Jones. I tried to look up some information on you as much as I could because I like to be prepared for the assignment that Pastor frequently gives me. And I loved everything that I found. As you were speaking, you started with who and where. And then academically, I've always been trained. For me, the most important question is how. Yeah. So, who is the church? Where is the church? Globalization is my field. You look for that, but the most important is how do you become the church? And you answered that. You answered that in many different ways. And so I loved it. And I just kept absorbing it. And so, you know, in the face of adversity, in the face of genocide, the church is where you plant it, let down your bucket where you are, and the church is us. And how do we to have the capacity to transform, to confront, open up another world wherever we may be? That's how the church is. And the church is in unlikely spaces and places. And the church is in conditions that are not the buildings, as you mentioned. And so thank you very, very much. And I'll stop there and let others raise their questions.
Thank you for those. You always bring such poignant observations, Robina. Um, Before I say anything, Elle, do you want to respond to anything Robina mentioned?
No, I think that's it's always beautiful when you hear something spoken back so so generously, and so like you clearly listened and so beautifully. So thank you. That's a real beautiful summary. Thank you.
So, the thing that one of the things that strikes me is, at the end, you you highlighted how you highlighted the solidarity between the radical black tradition and Palestinians. And earlier you mentioned Senator Raphael Warnock. And yeah, we know that story. In fact, Diane and I were at Ebenezer Baptist Church shortly after October 7th. And it was puzzling. Yeah, it was puzzling being there And so then I started paying more attention to the Congressional Black Caucus, which is basically siding with Israel all the time.
Mhm.
So how do you reconcile that where it seems like, well, just that's enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody read Ta-Nehisi Coates' latest. He did a really good piece on Kamala Harris, and he talks
Oh,
about this in there. So he talks about like how, what was the point of us getting here if when we got here, those children of all the civil rights marches would just like betray all these values. But one of the things that you see in that piece that's like really outrageous is now in this aftermath, so many of the people that are in the circle with Kamala Harris are like, yeah, I went to Palestine in 2014. And it's like really obvious that it's apartheid. And I recognize that right away. It's like, then why didn't you say it when it mattered? Right? Like these aren't stupid people. So now they're all saying that, yeah, of course we recognize it. Like we've all been there. We went to the West Bank. Like we couldn't drive on the roads. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, it's a really, really beautiful, like really long, like really involved article. And he really tries to unpack this role of empire, right? That Black America is oppressed by America, but is also part of the American empire. And when you go to lead in Black America, you are not the president of Black America, you're the president of the United States, right? And so he talks about how, along with these other reckonings with like capitalism, racism, we also have to add in reckoning with imperialism and how difficult this is, particularly for like Black Americans who rightly recognize that we are victims of America, but also become perpetrators within America. And that's like a very difficult discussion, right? And those of us who are not Black Americans and the rest of the diaspora, like constantly have this discussion. It's like one of the diaspora wars, right? Where you get people saying that, but like Black Americans come to our countries and bomb us. Like, so that's just a difficult, it's a difficult needle to thread, right? Like, and this is, I guess, goes back to this question that we're asking, that liberation theology requires us to do that work. And it's the same anywhere. So in Nova Scotia, one of our heroes, like William Hall, is the first Black Nova Scotian to win a Victoria Cross, like big deal, Black man. But he did it fighting for the British in India. So he was colonizing people, right? So we are
mm,
always like he was, the uprising. It's called the Indian Mutiny. It wasn't a mutiny. It was a resistance and uprising. And he went and like fired on Indians fighting for their freedom, right? So like, what do we do with that? What do we do with Buffalo soldiers that were, colonizing indigenous land? Like and what do we do with indigenous people that don't say, like, just because we are oppressed doesn't mean we also can't be, we buy into the citizenship of empire and we win it by oppressing others, right? That this is how we get citizenship, is by consent to state violence, right? And so what the ethics of the kingdom call us to is, it frees us all when we all free ourselves from those ethics. Like, why do we think our freedom is in having a Black president and not in every Black person having food? Why do we think our freedom is in the Black congressional caucus who vote to give us weapons and not in everybody having housing, not in the masses of Black people, not in the Black prisoners that we're inside Black August right now, which is a month that celebrates. I'll pause here because I don't want to actually, let's pause and say we are in Black August right now. And for those of you that don't know, Black August is proposed as an alternative to Black History Month, which is like more institutional. And it's a month of like revolutionary happenings around the world. So everything from the first enslaved people to land in the Virginias, the Nat Turner Revolution, the Attica Uprising, the Jamaican Uprising was those dates. Like there's Haitian uprisings at the same time. So like when you look around the world, so many of our revolutionary figures were either born or died in August, like Du Bois, Nkrumah, or like these events happened. So Black August is proposed as a month where we turn our minds to this history of liberation. And that is also what I was talking about today in terms of Christian liberation, right? Like liberation has to mean liberation for all. And why does someone like Kamala or Warnock or whoever like stand with Israel? Because there's money in it and power in it, and people convince themselves that at least I'll do better than the next person, right? This is the lie we tell ourselves. When I get the seat at the table, even if I have to make compromises, I'll be better than Trump. I'll be better than this other person. So it is actually a net better. And yes, she would have been better than Trump, but no, that still wasn't justice, right? Is that the small amount of justice we want? So these are the questions we have to ask. And the ethics that bring us there are these kingdom ethics that Jesus pushes us to. Like every time the people he loves, when they're like, well, can't we do this? He's like, no, disciples, no, like you can't do that. Actually, no, you actually have to give up all your money to come sit at my table. Like, yes, you do. It's uncompromising because otherwise it doesn't work, right? So I know I went on a long time there, but I really recommend that Ta-Nehisi Coates piece. He really
uh,
unpacks it. So
I had heard about the piece, but I haven't seen it, and now I find it urgent to check that out. Matt's hand is up. Um,
by the way,
yeah,
I'll just tell you that my friend is like old time friends with Ta-Nehisi Coates, and ever since he wrote the piece on Israel in his book, he's had to travel with security guards.
the message. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's like actually guarded now. Like that's how many threats he got for doing that, which shows you what the
Uh,
stakes are.
yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, whoever was it. I'm being so Canadian right now. If you guys don't know what I'm drinking, it's like Tim Hortons.
Tim
So
Hortons.
gross. Tim Hortons. That's like just sing the national anthem on top of me. Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Elle. I really appreciate your invitation to the Prestons in Halifax and rooting us in the people of Halifax, the history there. I myself come from prison abolitionist, restorative justice practitioner, so I'm always love to come across other people in that work in that space. And I think you nailed the question on the head that a lot of people were not really spending time to answer and lay out for people, which is the building of the restorative culture that we need. Like the fact that like, hey, we are not ready for prisons to be abolished, and so I think what I guess help us bridge that a little bit because understanding that uh, Gaza, the West Bank is just a open air prison, and so it is the incarceral state in practice, and so understanding that that is just like it is our imagination or the imagination of the imperial West, being enacted, and so that it's just, and this happens in our relationships as well too, and so how do we move to that restorative culture being built within us, but then also, I mean, I think a lot of us here, yeah, we're down, we have the progressive values, but like building towards that restorative world, I think that's like kind of a step that we don't really have a clear view of, and as a society, and I think as a community or folks doing community work. So I love talking about that question with other people. I was curious what your take is.
Yeah. So I sort of glanced by it in the piece. I talked, Marian Kaba talks, it's the cop in our hearts and the cop in our heads, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so even if we think about something like, one of the arguments people often make when you talk about a free Palestine is they're like, oh, so you just expect them to live like it can't possibly not mean chasing Jewish people out of Israel because that's what dominant cultures do. So they can't imagine a different way of being. Or if you say land back, people are like, oh, so indigenous people want to like violently kill us. It's like, no, that's what you did. That's not actually what indigenous people are talking about when they're talking about sovereignty over the land. They're actually talking about us living in a good way together, right? And in order to do that, we have to de-radicalize, release our dependence on capitalism and violence and all these things, right? But so I think that's part of it, right? We have to be able to imagine something beyond an eye for an eye. So if our only vision of free Palestine, and I'm not against I'm not against armed struggle. I know it's not very Christian, but I'm not against it. And I'm not also against the idea that people want justice. But like, if we believe the International Criminal Court is the site that is going to give us justice, it's not. It never has. It never will. So can we imagine, what does justice look like in the face of that, right? And this is where I think abolitionist ethics come into play. That we live in a world that conceives of justice as returning violence. Israel has a right to defend itself, right? Like that is such a violent ideology that says, well, as long as you can claim somebody's a terrorist or somebody's threatening you, then you have every right to use force, which is the same logic cops use when they shoot people and ICE use. We need to protect the borders. Like we have to recognize that logic when we see it. And the minute we engage in that logic, that the thing that keeps me safe is violence towards another person or exclusion towards another person, we are engaging in like how we cannot both be like, I'm against punishment in prisons and borders and then install borders in our own lives. So that's where the difficult and the critical ethical thinking is. So I often say, like, as an abolitionist, it's the point where we're most uncomfortable that is where most of our ethical reasoning takes place, right? It's the point where it becomes difficult. The point where you're like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I kind of think that cop that shot people should be like put in a cell forever, right? Like, how do you manage that? And there's not always good answers to it, but it's when we start reasoning around that we're actually asking ourselves to do transformative work. And then to put it in like Palestinian/religious terms, this is like the work of Sabeel, right? This is what they talk about. How Omar has said, empire does win. It wins all the time. But we are people of principles, we are people of values, and people of ethics, and that is how we survive and outlast and fight back to empire. We can't fight empire with their own weapons. They have nuclear weapons. We can never have those weapons. We never will, right? They won't let us have them even if we wanted them. Like we don't have the weapons that ICE agents had. We don't have the power of the presidency, but we have our values and principles. And those, what Palestinians call sumud, when it's unshakable, and when we refuse to let oppression change our values to among each other, to among how we treat ourselves, our neighbors, and each other, that is actually like the most important piece. So abolitionist reasoning starts there. And then in the practical, like if we want food security, we can grow food together. If we want housing for people, we can organize in our buildings. We can talk to our elders about sexual abuse and what they've been through and provide healing. We can deal with conflict in our friend group in different ways. We can learn to hold each other and ourselves accountable, right? These are all small things. But the kingdom isn't coming today, right? Like nothing's falling today or tomorrow. So how do we lay the ground? And this is, again, what I think Jesus did, like so consistently, right? Jesus went out among the people. Jesus healed the sick. Jesus shared food. Jesus was like basically a roving band of homeless people, if you want to put it that way. You know, like they challenged like every single piece of power. And in modern terms, yeah, he's anti-capitalist, he's anti-racist, he's like against gender roles. He's like women followed him, like got up and, you know, he wanted all of that. And so, yeah, I think that we know we're not getting it today, but we take all the steps we can and we find where those steps are in our life to change the ways of domination and violence. And, you know, this culture we live in that says there's only one way and like just beat them at their own game and we have to actually play something else. So I don't know. These are like really long answers. I hope that helps. You know, you should read my book now, but it is actually this.
Good plug. Good plug.
No, I'm not trying to plug my book in church. That's gross.
No, it's a good message. I mean, plug it, plug away.
Thank you so
Amen,
much
Clinton.
for your message today and in our little group. You know, it's funny. I was immediately saying, apologizing for America. You know, how do you Canadians think and or that area? And it's funny how you put it right back in perspective. Hey, we're just a couple degrees behind, and we still have our own issues too. You know, and that's the truth. It's being able to see reality. And I think that's what Jesus did. Jesus flipped tables and Jesus said, hey, let's look at the world real. Let's really look at the world. And you know, we do that, and it's funny because you know, for this right versus left, it's on the same bird, you know. And I started realizing and started educating myself a little bit about APAC and all these other things. And once you start watching the money behind it, you realize it's a puppet show. And I think what's happening is it's like the Wizard of Oz. People in social justice have been around and ahead on the curve, and they've been looking behind the curtain and understand it. And now the rest of us are just starting to get a peek at who is really behind what's going on. And I think it's good though. It's like a social spiritual awakening that's happening. So I think those honest conversations are important. It's okay to stop somebody mid-sentence and go, no, that's not how it really is.
Mm.
And inform them, you know what I mean? And I think that's it was just a great message today.
Yeah, and I think Jesus also reached for the best in people, right? And I think that's hard for us to do, especially if you have like MAGA family members or whatever, right? Like, but you know, not that work isn't for everyone. Like some people, that's just not their work. But if you that is something you're good at, it's actually important, right? That seeing the humanity in as many people as we can, right? Seeing people as Jesus sees us, and then trying to reach for that, even if we fail. I think that's really important.
Well, before we begin to close, Rubina, any final observations?
Yes, I do have several, but I'll just talk about one, which is anytime that we talk about security, it is talking about violence and increasing insecurity. And especially when you link it with food, that's not the way to go. It makes the point that you made really, really strongly and assertively is when people talk about being American or being Black or being anything else, as a citizen of the United States, you are part and parcel of empire. So I think to go back to food, food security means talking within the frame, in the framework that is the mainstream. To turn the tables, whether it's upside down or sideways, you need to talk in another frame, in a different language, in different concepts. And so the new, different way to talk about food is being food sovereign rather than being food secure, because security is tied to dollars and violence and imposition, etc. So Jesus, God is sovereign, self-sufficient. Food sovereignty would mean being sovereign, being self-sufficient, and not dependent on this larger framework of global food or national food system. So I think you kind of lay it out really well, and I'm translating it into the language that I know and the framework that I'm working with. So thank you again.
Thank you. And that's beautiful because, like, obviously the communion is our ritual sharing. And there's always enough, right? God is abundance. We already have, as Muhammad Dawish says, we have on this earth all that we need for living, right? Like, it's already here. God has given it to us. We don't need more than that. So.
And speaking of communion, we are going to close with communion. But Elle, I just have to say, Diane and I have been in your neck of the woods. We've gone to Africville.
Yes.
Maybe you should tell everybody what Africville is.
So Africville is a Black community. It was actually founded by refugees of the War of 1812. So a number of Black refugees came up at that point. And so it's a like community that was founded on the shores of the Bedford Basin, like self-sufficient community. The city in the 1960s, just like in South Africa, where they were, so as part of this like urban renewal across the globe. So same thing as putting Black people into like townships. The city decided it was a slum and they're going to clear it because they had never provided city services. So first they tried to force the people out. So they ran train tracks through the place. They put the prison near it. It had like the hospital for infectious diseases. The city dump was located in the middle of the community. And when the people still wouldn't sell, then they like tried to set people against each other. Like they opened suitcases of cash and tried to buy people out. And when people still wouldn't sell, they bulldozed the church in the middle of the night. And then they forced the people out and literally put them in garbage trucks and like bulldozed the community. And then for many years until about 2012, what they put in its place was a dog walk park. So it was one of two off-leash zone dog parks in the city. So a community that was like generations of Black people, like was literally, as my partner put it, a place where they take their pets to shit, like, you know, on the graves of our ancestors. So yeah, it's there still is still an active like group of survivors that are still trying to get back the land or get reparations for that. So if you look up the story of Africville, there's a number of documentaries about it. And if you come to Halifax, you should definitely, it's not like there's nothing to like see. There's like this museum, but the land, they literally forced people out. But Africville still lives through the people. So yeah.
And I will just say, the American South is Africville.
Oh yeah, because we're all everyone here is Virginia, the Carolinas, like that's so like if you go to North Preston Church, they still do the shout and stuff. You actually see a lot of the same traditions. So the community here is very, very much Black American. So on that note, yeah.
Thank you, Elle. Yeah, can we get everybody to take a moment to say thank you to Elle for being here. I'm kind of thinking, I don't know what your schedule is like, but we'd like to get you back.
Anytime.
All right.
Let me know.
All right. We will do that. And we will close with communion. Dan's going to lead us in communion. Elle's going to be in the rotation.
What a profoundly true, challenging, incisive, word, Elle, and what a challenging example you are for us. Thank you. It gives us all an idea of how to move forward more genuinely. And as we're reminded, when Jesus took the bread and broke it, we know that he identified with every moment of human experience, every place of injustice, oppression, suffering, loss, devastation. He's present in the midst of all of it, present in the midst of the abuse of power, not in any way ever condoning or accepting, but bringing the possibility of deliverance and repentance and transformation. So as we take the bread today, we know that Jesus is with us in every moment to bring healing, forgiveness, reconciliation, transformation. So we take this in remembrance of him. And ultimately, the price for the injustice and abuse that Elle has so profoundly expressed today, it's overwhelming. And Jesus alone took all that expression of violence, injustice, abuse on himself, broke its power, and releases cleansing and forgiveness again only where there is true, humble surrender of all that is out of order, and to receive the forgiveness with a grateful heart. So as we take the cup, we're reminded that there is true forgiveness, true healing, where there's humility and repentance, and we're all level at the foot of the cross. So we take this remembrance of you, Jesus, with grateful hearts. And we look forward, ultimately, as we contend for justice and righteousness in this broken world, we look forward to a new creation where we finally are free to see everybody as Ellis described, as we really are in fact, and able to love with mutual trust and honor and respect, without any injustice, without any abuse of power and control, but where there's that true mutuality. Thank you again. We're so grateful, Elle, for your message and your example. Amen.